David stood in the bathroom at his company's quarterly meeting, staring at his reflection. 32 years old, senior analyst, well-liked, successful by most metrics. In 10 minutes, he was supposed to present a proposal he'd worked on for 3 months. A proposal he believed in. A proposal that challenged the way his department had operated for years. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. Not because the proposal was weak, because he knew exactly what would happen. Mark from finance would raise his eyebrows in that dismissive way. Jennifer would exchange a look with Tom. His manager would do that tight smile that meant she's being polite, but this won't go anywhere. He could already feel their judgment, heavy as stone. He'd rewritten the presentation 4 times. Not to make it better, to make it safer, to soften the challenge, to minimize the chance that anyone would disagree, disapprove, or think less of him. He'd carved away everything bold until what remained was acceptable. Forgettable. Not what he actually believed, but what he thought they could tolerate it. He looked at himself in the mirror and thought, when did I become this person? When did their opinions become more important than my own? Meanwhile, in 17th century Japan, a Zen master named Takuan was teaching the greatest swordsman in history a principle that would transform not just combat, but consciousness itself. Miyamoto Musashi, undefeated in over 60 duels, attributed his mental invincibility not to technique, but to a single teaching Takuan had given him about the nature of mind and the prison of caring. Here's what nobody tells you. The reason you care what others think isn't because their opinions matter. It's because you've trained your mind to stop at their judgment instead of flowing through it. And that stopping, that fixation, is what creates suffering. Takuan discovered something revolutionary. Freedom from others' opinions isn't about not caring. It's about not stopping. David's breaking point came 3 weeks after that presentation. He delivered the safe version. It had been received politely. Nothing changed. He felt nothing. That night, scrolling through LinkedIn, he saw a former colleague, Eric, announcing a new venture. Eric had been fired 2 years ago for pushing too hard on a controversial initiative. Everyone had whispered about how he destroyed his career. But the venture he was announcing had just raised $3 million in funding. The controversial initiative he'd been fired for was now the foundation of a company. David stared at the announcement. Eric had cared more about his vision than their approval of. He'd lost his job but kept his integrity. David had kept his job but lost something harder to name. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the original version of his presentation. The bold one. The true one. The one he'd buried because he was afraid of 8 people's eyebrows raising. The next morning, David did something uncharacteristic. He searched for books on fearlessness. Most were generic. But one title stopped him. The Unfettered Mind by Takuan, a 17th century Zen master writing to samurai about the nature of mental freedom. David bought it. He didn't expect much, but what he found in those pages would dismantle the prison he'd been living in. Takuan's central teaching was simple but profound. The mind should be like water. When you throw a stone into water, the water responds instantly, then returns to stillness. It doesn't hold the stone. It doesn't obsess over the stone. It doesn't stop flowing because of the stone. The stone passes through and the water remains water. But the human mind, Takuan wrote, stops. Someone criticizes you and your mind fixates on the criticism. Someone judges you and your mind grips the judgment. Someone disapproves and your mind builds a story around the disapproval. The mind stops flowing and becomes stuck. And in that stuckness is suffering. Takuan called this stopped mind sickness. The mind that stops at any particular thought or emotion becomes sick. It loses its natural fluidity. For a samurai, a stopped mind meant death. If your mind stopped on your opponent's sword, you missed his footwork. If your mind stopped on fear of losing, you lost your ability to respond. The greatest swordsmen weren't the ones who felt no fear. They were the ones whose minds didn't stop at fear. David read this and felt something crack open. He'd spent years thinking the problem was that he cared what people thought. But caring wasn't the problem. Stopping was the problem. His mind would land on Mark's disapproval and fixate there. Build a story there. Replay it, analyze it, try to prevent it. His mind had stopped flowing and become a prisoner to a moment that hadn't even happened yet. Takuan taught Musashi a practice he called Fudoshin, the immovable mind. But immovable didn't mean rigid. It meant unmoved by external circumstances. Like a mountain is immovable, not because it's hard but because it's rooted. The winds blow, the seasons change, storms come and go. The mountain remains, not because it resists the wind, but because it doesn't identify with the wind. David started applying this. Small situations first. In meetings, when someone dismissed his idea, he'd notice his mind starting to stop, starting to grip the dismissal, build a story about what it meant. And instead of following that pattern, he'd practice flowing. The dismissal happened. He noted it. Then he let his mind return to stillness, not pretending it didn't hurt, but not stopping it to hurt. It felt unnatural at first. His entire conditioning screamed at him to analyze, defend, adjust. But slowly, something shifted. He realized that most of the suffering wasn't the dismissal itself. It was the story he built after the dismissal, the meaning he assigned, the narrative he constructed. The dismissal was a stone. The suffering was his mind stopping. Takuan wrote to Musashi, "If you don't stop your mind anywhere, it is everywhere. If you stop it somewhere, it is nowhere." This became David's mantra. When his mind wanted to fixate on whether Jennifer approved of his comment, he'd whisper, "Don't stop." When his mind wanted to replay Tom's reaction, he'd whisper, "Flow through." Slowly, his mind began to remember its natural state. Responsive but not stuck. Aware but not identified. 3 months into this practice, David was in a leadership meeting. The CEO asked for bold ideas. David felt the familiar fear rising. His mind wanted to stop there, calculate the risk, edit himself into safety. But instead, he spoke. The original version. The challenging version. The true version. Mark's eyebrows did raise. Jennifer did exchange a look with Tom. His manager did hesitate. David felt it all. And he didn't stop at all. And he didn't stop. He let his mind flow through the reaction without gripping it. He finished speaking and returned to stillness. The room was quiet. Then the CEO leaned forward. "Tell me more." For the next 20 minutes, David elaborated. Not everyone agreed. Some challenged him. When someone disagreed, he didn't collapse into self-doubt. When someone agreed, he didn't inflate into validation. He stayed rooted, unmoved. Fudoshin. After the meeting, his manager pulled him aside. "I don't know what's changed, David, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That was the most present I've ever seen you." That night, David reread Takuan's letters. He found a passage he'd underlined. Takuan wrote that the mind obsessed with others' approval is like a servant who has forgotten he has a master. The servant runs from person to person asking what to do, terrified of making anyone unhappy, exhausting himself in service to everyone's opinions. Meanwhile, the master, his own true nature, sits ignored. David realized he'd been that servant, running from opinion to opinion, trying to satisfy everyone, losing himself in the process. Takuan's teaching wasn't about becoming arrogant or dismissive. It was about returning to the master, your own deepest knowing, your own integrity. Let that be the root. Let everything else flow through like wind through a mountain. But the real test came 6 months later. David proposed something radical, a complete restructuring of his department's approach. He knew it would be controversial. He knew it would make people uncomfortable. Old David would have killed the idea before it reached air, too afraid of the reaction. New David wrote the proposal exactly as he saw it, then submitted it without hedging. The reaction was mixed. Half the leadership thought it was brilliant. Half thought it was reckless. The company split. David's manager called him in, her face serious. "David, you've put me in a difficult position." Half the executive team thinks you're visionary. Half think you're insubordinate. I need to know. Are you sure about this? David felt the weight of the moment. His career could turn on this conversation. His mind wanted desperately to stop here, to calculate, to adjust, to find the safe answer. But he'd been training. He took a breath. He found his route. I'm sure about the proposal, he said. I'm not attached to whether it gets approved. I'm not attached to whether people agree. I believe it's the right direction. If the company decides differently, I'll respect that. But the first won't unsay what I believe to be true. His manager studied him. Then she smiled. You've changed, David. 6 months ago, you would have apologized and backpedaled. I'll take this back to the team. 2 weeks later, the proposal was approved. Not because David had convinced everyone. Half the team still had doubts, but the CEO said something David never forgot. We're approving this because David presented it from a place of conviction, not performance. We need more of that around here. David realized Takuan had been right. The world doesn't respect the servant who runs between opinions. The world respects the mountain that remains rooted while the winds blow. A year after discovering Takuan, David was having coffee with a younger colleague, Marcus. Marcus was brilliant but paralyzed by others' opinions. He'd been working on an idea for months, but couldn't bring himself to share it. What if they think it's stupid? Marcus asked. What if I embarrass myself? David smiled. He recognized that prison. He'd lived in it most of his life. Marcus, let me tell you about a 17th century Zen master who taught the greatest swordsman in history how to be free. David explained Takuan's teaching. The mind like water. The stopped mind versus the flowing mind. Fudoshin, the immovable mind. Not trying to control others' reactions, but not stopping at them either. The fear of judgment is natural, David said. But suffering from judgment is optional. The suffering happens when your mind stops at their opinion and builds a prison there. Let the opinion pass through. Feel it, note it, release it. Stay rooted in your own knowing. Marcus listened, skeptical but curious. So you just stop caring what people think? No, David said. You care. You just don't stop. There's a huge difference. Caring means you're open to feedback, willing to learn, responsive to others. Stopping means you're imprisoned by their reaction, unable to move until they approve. One is wisdom, one is slavery. David pulled out his phone and sent Marcus the book. Read this, practice this. It won't make you fearless. It'll make you free. 6 months later, Marcus presented his idea. It was controversial. Some people loved it. Some dismissed it. But Marcus didn't collapse and he didn't inflate. He stayed rooted. After the meeting, he texted David one word. Flow. David smiled. The teaching had passed on. Takuan's wisdom, given to Musashi 400 years ago, had traveled through centuries to free 2 men in a corporate office from a prison that had no walls. The prison of the stopped mind. Now let me ask you something. You've made it this far. That means you know this prison. Maybe you've edited yourself in a meeting. Maybe you've killed an idea before speaking it. Maybe you've changed who you are to fit who you think they want you to be. Maybe you're exhausted from running between opinions, trying to make everyone comfortable, losing yourself in the process. Here's the practice Takuan taught, and David lived. Start small. Next time someone judges you, criticizes you, dismisses you, notice what your mind does. Does it stop? Does it grip the judgment and build a story? Does it replay the moment? Analyze the meaning? Try to fix it? That's the stopped mind. That's the prison. Instead, practice flowing. Let the judgment be a stone thrown into water. The water responds, then returns to stillness. You feel the criticism, you note it, you let it pass through. You don't pretend it didn't happen. You don't suppress the feeling. You just don't stop there. You don't build a prison there. Second, find your root. What do you actually believe? What do you actually value? Not what you think you should believe. Not what would make you likable, but what's true for you. Write it down. Know it. Let that be your mountain. Let everything else be weather. Third, Practice Fudoshin in low-stakes situations. The barista gets your order wrong. Your mind wants to stop at the annoyance. Practice flow. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your mind wants to stop at the disrespect. Practice flow. Build the muscle in small moments so you have it in big ones. And finally, remember this. Freedom from others' opinions isn't about becoming cold or arrogant. It's about becoming water. Responsive but not stuck. Present but not imprisoned. Caring but not stopping. Takuan taught Musashi this principle, and Musashi never lost a duel. Not because he didn't feel fear, but because his mind didn't stop at fear. David learned this principle and transformed his career, not because people stopped judging him, but because he stopped stopping at their judgment. The teaching is ancient. The prison is current. The key has always been the same. Don't stop your mind anywhere, and it will be everywhere. Stop it somewhere, and it will be nowhere. Comment below the moment you realized you were living for others' approval instead of your own integrity. When you name it, you begin to release it. When you release it, you begin to flow. The opinions will always come. The question is whether you'll build a prison from them or let them pass like wind through a mountain. You already know the answer. Now practice it.